That is such a powerful vision, and I love the metaphoric use here and kind of extending that. I think the question that I like to ask people who are in connection, does this relationship actually bring out my best? Not in theory, but in reality.
Welcome to another edition of the New Human Experience podcast with me, and in this case with Rainier as well. And really happy that you said yes to being a guest on the podcast today. I'm excited about the conversation we'll have, and loved following and still do a lot of your content that you share into the world, especially on love and relational spaces, and these seemingly quite big areas of life that are very meaningful and very impactful, some would say, and I would say this, maybe the most meaningful of our human experience. And so welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love hearing you say that about this kind of meaning behind relationships, and my own sense is around that. I know that there's other pathways to purpose or God or healing or a sense of wholeness. I remember years ago asking a mentor of mine about this, and he said, well, it's all about the questions your life wants to ask. And I think that's a great way of saying it. What questions does your life want to ask? And I've always found that my life wants to ask very relational questions, and my life seems to be asking, how can I get along well with myself and with others at the same time? Not just myself. That's hard enough.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I be alone in a room and, not despise myself, or, sit in, misery, or how can I be together with others well? And I think that can be such a challenge. How can I not betray myself? But then when you put those two things together, oh my God, right? Like, how can I be a self in relationship to others? And I feel like that really has been, when I look at the short span of my life, the set of questions that everything in me wants to ask. And so that's really what I've given my life to.
Oh, that's beautiful. And for our listeners that are maybe new to you, I don't know if you want to give a little snapshot, because, trying to have somebody categorize their life in, a minute or two of this happened, that happened, here's where I'm at. And so I don't know if you want to start with maybe where you're at right now and what you're doing in the world. And, even more than what we're doing is who we are as people. And so how are you interacting with either clients or, your audience, and what's some of the more top of mind things that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, I'm an author, I'm a teacher, I'm a mentor. I've racked up some credentials after my names. I've earned some degrees. I've done some things. I've taught at some schools, be they graduate schools or undergraduate schools. I've coached clients. I've psychotherapized individuals. I've humanized the human head. I've sat on couches with people. But I think a quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald sums up what I really feel. And he said, in his relationship with Ernest Hemingway, he said, I speak with the authority of failure. And I think that this is a much better approach to living than those who would, as he described Ernest Hemingway, speak with the authority of success. I am not interested in Green Berets. I am not interested in Boy Scouts who have simply not lived, who have not amassed enough life to know what they are or aren't about. So if I look back at my life, I quite simply see a long laundry list of blow-ups and burnouts and fudges and mistakes. I mean, really, I see like a steady series of, I divorced my first wife. I built a beautiful community, a spiritual community during my 20s that fell apart after a decade, and that was a tremendous loss. I had this happen or that happen, this tragedy, that tragedy. And so sometimes, people come to me and they say, why should I listen to you? And I said, because I failed. That's why. Yeah. And I paid attention. And I think we really need people to answer honestly and to say, because I failed, because I paid attention, not because I read a textbook somewhere. Mm-hmm. I had a wonderful follower drop into my DMs recently. They were a therapist, and they said, I want you to know I start every session by reading one of your posts to my clients, and I wait and I see what they'll say. And I said, isn't that wonderful? Oh my God, isn't that wonderful? You read my posts to your clients. That's so fantastic. But you know what I think would be much better? If you simply described the content of your life. Because all I'm doing is just describing the content of my life. And what would happen if we were honest? So anyway, back to your original question. All I am is someone who has lassoed a rock and pulled it on my head. Or as Sisyphus brilliantly described, I just pushed the boulder up the hill and kept watching the boulder fall back. I'm someone who, in truth, has been tremendously interested across the years in transformation. Yeah. And have pursued that and been able to pursue that really since I was a young man, whether in spiritual communities or earning my graduate degree in psychology, then working as a psychotherapist and teaching graduate school, eventually becoming a coach and a mentor. I published a book called As You Are, which was a beautiful bestseller on Amazon, and then teaching a number of people in creativity and really changing their life. This has kind of been a strange trajectory for me. But I think like how I sit in front of you now is I just get the opportunity to talk to people about their lives. And I'm not so much interested in, trying to tell people how to change. I think Alan Watts said it really beautifully. He said, I'm not so interested in trying to change your mind. I'm interested in telling you about the symphony that I heard and playing the music for you and hoping that you might be inspired by the music too. God, I love that.
That's powerful, beautiful. Well, and everything you shared feels powerful, and it's interesting because that's kind of how I started engaging with your content, is reading some of your posts. And one of the things that came to mind is I've been through enough elements of life to know that reading your posts, I'm like, this guy's been through some stuff. And I love how you framed the failures, because even as you're sharing that, it's kind of pulling on these pieces of me of being a recovering pleaser, fixer, perfectionist, that I hate fucking up. Like I really do. And I think there's so many experiences I've had in my life where I avoided that so much that actually created the very experience I was trying to not create, instead of focused on what is my intention here, of what is it actually that's wanting to come through me. And the thing that I come back to all the time is the learning and the curiosity. Even when something's being brought to my attention that is not fun to hear. And I would avoid conflict and criticism like the plague, of do anything possible to not have that enter my space, because I would take it on as some kind of value that I'm not worthy, I'm not a good human. Yes, I have all these inadequacies and insecurities. Thanks for seeing them, pointing them out. Why don't I just go walk away in the bush now and hide forever in a cave? And still to this day, even this morning, actually, I had a really deep conversation with a friend of mine. And I'm just going to be honest, for part of that conversation, I felt like throwing up. And there was emotion and these things that I thought, and not just thought, things that I have worked on plenty. that still there's some of these patterns that will find their way to the surface, and it was being called out very beautifully and with so much love. And I still felt like garbage, not because they were making me feel that way. It's my own shame or insecurities or embarrassment of, I have said this to other people and friends too. If you're not embarrassed by the former version of you from like a year or two ago, you're probably not growing very much. And I've felt that way about myself playing. I'm like, oh, Kev, you were not showing up really well then, but you thought you were. Yeah. And now I can see a new aspect. And, you know, with some of the content I've taken in from you and listening to, you know, one of the podcasts you mentioned you had, you know, taken that in, and I think it was called Live Like Hell. Just the series, right, of really kind of getting the fabric of your experiences and being so inspired by your courage and your authenticity to just own it and take self-responsibility. And I could see from my past, I avoided many things, including self-responsibility. And what I wanted to take responsibility for was only the good stuff I was creating, not pain or hurt or these other things. I'm like, I don't know who created that. It definitely wasn't me. Look at my stack of good stuff over here. And then, you know, having life meet you in a way where you can't avoid it anymore. And so I know I've said a bunch just there. I'll take a breath and let it all be here.
You know, I actually think this is a really good way of talking about the human shadow, which is, I don't know if I talk about this a lot today. I used to talk about it quite a bit. I think it's worthy of referencing, though, because it forms a whole. You know, when we think about a human being, we really are such a combination of the person you see, the public-facing self, which, as you said, you know, it's like, it's the light part of us. It's the part that we want everyone to see. It's our resume self. God, it's, you know, who are you? Oh, I'm Rainier. I'm Kevin. I'm who you really want to get to know. You know, it's the part that you want everyone to know. I don't want to show you my bad qualities. And of course, it's the part that we develop, we cultivate, we curate. And we are involved since very early on in cutting away all the parts that might cause us harm, might cause other people harm. We're very invested in making sure that anything that might damage us, damage our reputation, hurt others, take us out of belonging, get us kicked off the island, would be minimized. And so where does all that go? Well, it doesn't disappear. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's not like our anger, our jealousy, our you know, utter rage at times, or our lust, or our envy, all these different things, these components. It's not like they evaporate. So where do they go? Well, they go into what I've sometimes termed the basement of shadows, right? It goes into this lockbox way down deep. And there, in the most shadowy parts of ourselves, it hides out. Mm-hmm. It camps out. And that's where we try to keep it for the most part. We keep it under wraps. And you know, it hides as best it can until the bottle gets uncorked. And when it does, when it pushes its way to the surface, that's when all kinds of nasty, disturbing, awful things happen. It bubbles out, or it seeps out, the cork pops, and all of a sudden we're caught, we're surprised, and we're like, oh my God, put that back. That was really, Kevin, how dare you? You know, and then we blush, we feel very ashamed. You know, shame is an affective emotion when we're out of congruence with the community that we're in relationship to, and we feel very, you know, well, ashamed, and we say, oh my God, I need to be back in relationship. I should hide this thing, or I should cut away this thing. I should do something different. And so what do we do with that lust? What do we do with that? I have an affair. I had an affair. I should probably change my behavior. I should make amends. And you know what? Shame is a tremendously effective emotion. You know, I think shame post Brene Brown has been incredibly, worked over culturally. And I think good. right? Because I think shame for many of us has been paralyzing. There is also, as you pointed out, something that I would call effective shame, right? Like where we go, oh my God, I did that. I should probably take responsibility for that. And so we convert shame into appropriate guilt, and that guilt becomes responsibility, and I change my ways. But I think like ultimately, what I want to say is that within that relationship of shadows to light, a lot of us have these buried parts of ourselves that we've hidden, we've cut away, and we've had to hide, but is a part of our whole being. And we don't acknowledge them. And we spend a lot of ourselves saying, that's not me. And when other people find out about it, they go, oh, that's not you. And we feel very unlovable because of it. And what would happen if we looked in the mirror and we said, first of all, that is me. And second of all, we said, and I am still worthy of love. In fact, the parts that I deem the most unlovable are probably the parts that are most in need of love.
Yeah. Gosh, you're reminding me of, I've done lots of Tony Robbins events and material and things, and Date with Destiny, I remember going a couple of times, and day 4 is relationship day. And two of the greatest human fears that he talked about is that I'm not enough and that I won't be loved. And it's like, I won't be loved because of, insert any number of things. And so what you just shared there is so profound, and I could feel the emotion in my own system of those parts and those hidden parts, of which I feel I have many still, are actually the places where the most love is needed. The shadow is what is hiding the most amount of light, but it is often the last place we look. And I think with thousands of visits, you mentioned you get to hear people's stories and you get to connect. And that is one of the things I've loved the most of being in clinical practice for, 15 plus years. I get to know people in a way that maybe most people don't, of all the things we're talking about that they don't share anywhere else. Yeah. And the thousands of times I've heard somebody say, I've never shared this before. And those moments, sometimes I feel like I want to cry because of how special that is, and the energy and the space that's being held for those things, and the people that have held me in my life, especially in those places that really made me feel unworthy, or if they know this or they understand this, there's no way that they can hold love in these places. And then in some ways, experiencing that when I would share my truth or I would share these things, then it did feel like love was revoked or that person went away. And then it could kind of perpetuate that pattern. See, I should have kept that shit hidden. I should have done that. Yeah. And then there's been lots of places, I would say in more recent years of my life, where that's not been the case, that I've been shown incredible love and incredible grace, especially when I believed I didn't deserve it. Because the other piece that I'd learned in that is, I always felt like I had to earn my love. I got to be of service, I got to contribute, and then I can receive love. And so for a lot of the people listening, we've woven in some threads of shame, guilt, like effective shame. I love how you said that is, and then moving into a space. What could we kind of feel through as we're talking about this, of how to alchemize that more without getting stuck in the shame basement or the shadow basement and never coming out? Because the other piece I want to thread in through the overall conversation is that being a clinician, and I'm sure you've seen this millions of times, people's health is intricately woven into exactly what we're talking about, and that patients come in and see me, autoimmune conditions, many diagnoses, many different labels, and at the end of the day, it comes down to this stuff, and it's often been well overlooked if they haven't worked with anybody like me or maybe like you to actually help them go a bit deeper and unpack of maybe you don't need that medication, maybe you need to ask these questions and address what's in the basement there.
Yeah. I think this actually ties back into our prior conversation, and maybe this is my own bias, but I really believe there's something tied up here. We live in a society today that is I think one keystroke away from enlightenment at any given time. It's like Google is the ascended master. Every podcast is a pilgrimage. We think that we can literally sit on our couch and somehow arrive at healing. Solo, independent, outside of relationship, outside of community. We have, I think, socially secluded ourselves from any sense of actual healing, actual wholeness. And I want to say this is a falsehood created in the age of the quick fix, in the age of social distancing and isolation. And it is categorically untrue. So when we talk about the deep despair often created by the bifurcation and the fragmentation of our shame and of our shadows, it will only be healed in deep connection and relationship. It cannot be done on your own. Mm-hmm. And so whether that's sitting across from someone like yourself or myself, which I believe is a start, but I don't believe it's the finish point. And I think a lot of people actually believe this about therapy. And I think it's one of the problems. I'm gonna put a stake in the ground here. I believe it's one of the problems with the modern day approach to therapy. We have professional goers to therapy who are stuck in an inner child place and are in professional daycare centers where they are never growing up and becoming inner adults, right? Because they have actually not moved on. I think that one of the things is you actually have to be in community with individuals, that the wound happens in relationship. And so healing has to happen in relationship with ever widening circles of people, not just one, but more and more and more. And so we find that we live our lives in widening circles, as the poet Rilke said. And I think that that is so important, that we cannot do this work on our own. Mm-hmm. And so how does that alchemize, you ask? How does that begin? Well, first, let's start with what we can do on our own. Like, the relationship with self is in fact a relationship. So we would start with the one-on-one relationship first. So I do want to actually go all the way back to that single relationship. Everything's relational. I am a relationship, at least with myself. I spent some time in the Greek island of Crete, which is the first time I ever really doubted coaching or therapy, because I got to spend time with a village holy man who really knocked me on my socks there. I had just published this book, and I was set up with this Zorba the Greek-like figure by someone who had dropped into my world out of nowhere. Now, I need to back up and tell this story because I think you're going to appreciate it, because, it was an unprecedented time. The pandemic had sort of just happened. I had released this book because I was like, well, no one's going to hear from me. I'm sitting at home. I can't really get out too many places. I should just write a book. So I write a book. I self-publish it because I'm a little DIY, a little punk like that. I have my friend who's a phenomenal artist who his winery had been closed down due to the pandemic. He had nothing to do. So I have him do the art for it. He hands me back this phenomenal manuscript. It becomes a runaway success. I'm like, my God, what happened? Mm-hmm. So one thing leads to another. My wife and I get COVID, which at the time, everybody, if you got COVID in that moment in time, you thought it was a death sentence. Turns out we lived. We were like, wow, that was cool. So we decide to recover in Oaxaca, Mexico on a nude beach. So we're there in Oaxaca on this nude beach, sunning ourselves. And I'm sitting using the modern typewriter of my phone, and I'm doing some writing. And in that moment, I feel like it's the best writing of my life. I mean, I'm just cranking this out, and I feel like a modern Ernest Hemingway. It's like, the heavens are parting. And I look at my wife and I say, I kid you not, if I just had a month in the middle of the Mediterranean, I think I would write my masterpiece. I do. I think that's what would happen. We go to bed that night. I wake up the next morning to a DM in my Instagram box from a follower who I've never talked to before. I don't know her name. I don't recognize her. And she said, I know you don't know me, but I own a hotel in Crete. I would love to invite you to I would like to patron you and for you to stay at my hotel for a month this summer if you would like to. And perhaps you would like to write more. I was so touched by your book. Would that be something you would be interested in? Now, I got to tell you, I thought it was one of those moments where Instagram had been listening in on my conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
I was like, is this some weird AI? Anyway, it was not. It was incredible. It was a manifesting moment, which I don't even know my stand on manifesting, but boy, it was an amazing thing. So one story leads to the other. So now I'm in Crete. She hooks me up with her father-in-law, who's like Zorba the Greek incarnate in a modern day. So we're now up in the hills of Crete. He's like a billy goat at 70 years old. I'm huffing it, having a hard time staying up with him. We're drinking like this fresh wine that he had made. We're sitting up there and we're talking. And he asks me like what I've done with my life. I said, well, I just wrote a book. And he looks at me and now I'm going to do my best Greek impression. He says, oh, just one book, huh? And I say, what do you mean just one? And he says, oh, one book. That could be fluke. And so I now feel very chopped down to size. He says, you got to write two, at least then you're actually author. So I'm like, okay, that's what I'm trying to work on. He said, well, what do you do before? And so I say, well, I had been this and that. I'd been a therapist. I'd been a coach. He then looks at me and said, I think that bullshit profession. Now I'm aghast at that point. I'm like, what do you mean? And he says, no, I don't mean insult. It's like, we live in bullshit age. We need bullshit things, like this. This is okay. We got to sit around and bullshit sometimes. I go to therapists all the time. I bullshit, you bullshit, I bullshit. We all bullshit. And so, it's like, I'm kind of cracking up. I'm like, this is great. He said, he goes, what else is bullshit? Priests are bullshit. And so I'm like, okay, tell me more. So he goes on, he tells me these great stories about priests and I'm just howling. I'm like cracking up and he tells me like, who confesses to the priests? Everybody, but who do the priests confess to? And so then he says they confess to him. And so he's heard all the good stories. And then I say, well, who do you confess to? Like, who do you really talk to? And then he gets real serious and he looks at me and he says, I tell you the truth. I confess to no one, not really. The truth is, I do mirror work. Now, I've heard of mirror work and I'm familiar with lingo. And so I'm like, yeah. He says, I look in mirror. And when I can look in mirror and no longer look away in shame, then I am done confessing. And I do not come back again until I need to. I got to tell you, I sat there and I just sobbed.
Yeah.
Actually just sobbed because I realized the depth of truth that he was talking about. Like when you can look into your own eyes. I on the flight home, the big jumbo jet that passes across the Atlantic, I went into the crowded plane stall and I got very up close and personal with myself, nose smashed against the mirror. And I looked into my eyes. I found it incredibly difficult. In spite of all the work I had done across all the years, in spite of all the healing, I found it difficult to see myself. So I kept looking. And then I said those words that I've so often said, I love you. And I noticed something. I didn't believe it. So I kept looking. And then the tears involuntarily just started streaming. And it was like I saw myself all the way back to my infancy. And I didn't look away. And I kept on not looking away, and eventually you realize people are stacking up outside the bathroom doors. But I understood what he means. And I've got to tell you, I think there's a kind of truth. That's where I would start. You talk about alchemizing, start there. The second thing that I would say, and I know that we're perhaps belaboring this and I've told silly stories, but I think it's so important to hammer. But I think the second thing is expand outward. Tell your stories in places that they can be heard. Tell your stories in places that they can be heard. I remember talking to my partner and my wife, and we've been through it all, really. You referenced a podcast of ours, Love Like Hell, which the first season that we put out documents a painful time in our relationship where I actually disclosed to her that I had had an affair. And we talk about not only that disclosure, but then our extended recovery and renewal process, and how we went from a time of deep pain to a time of deep healing, and a really powerful relationship. And 14 years later, we're here.
Wow. Still
an incredible relationship. And one of the powerful moments in our relationship much later was a moment I can still remember, her cradling me in her arms like a mother would cradle her child. And I remember telling her a story that I don't think I had told anyone. Maybe I myself had forgotten it. And sharing this particular story that I perhaps had become numb to, and tears streaming down her face as she allowed herself to become rocked by this new truth. And suddenly her saying, "That's it, isn't it? That's the bottom of it. That's the very bottom of everything that you've kept across these years. I see you." And I've got to tell you, when you have someone else in your life hold you like that, and see you like that, and know you like that, and love you like that, it's awfully hard to not love you back. Yeah. So you see this idea of I see myself, I know myself, I love myself in widening circles. And then you have your front line of friends around you, like not the world, but 3 or 5. So shadow work is really one of those things where paralyzing shame is pushed back through vulnerability and openness and authenticity. Yeah.
Brother, that's all of it. I think you did the Greek voice pretty good. And I love, obviously, all the content there. And I mean, I could feel the emotion on that too, that even just imagining doing the mirror work, I feel like it's way easier for me to look at other people than myself. I've become a professional eye looker in my practice in many other ways. And I'm not saying it doesn't serve a really beautiful purpose. I get to witness amazing transformation. And I transform with every interaction, every session. And certainly the most transformation I've experienced in my life is, through relationship. And all of these pieces that get brought forward, I've experienced this to some degree, but I've seen this especially with close friends too, where maybe they're in relationship and they go through a breakup and they come into this space of solo, and they do tons of work on themselves, and they come through that, and they're feeling so good and so aligned and so clear. And then they enter into relationship, and all of that gets upended completely. And you think, from the outside looking in, like, what happened? That was the most stable, secure, clear, heart-led I've ever seen you. And now you're a few months into this new dynamic, and the apple cart is twisted upside down. There's stuff everywhere. And you think, what's happened here? But I think even in this moment, I'm having a realization, like, that's actually the most beautiful part, is that all of these places get looked at and excavated. And what you just shared about your wife holding you in that way, like that that is love and depth in a way of being seen right to the bottom that I don't think many people get a chance to experience. And even in my own life and my own experiences, I started, I've been through divorce myself. I stopped equating time with success in relationships. And what are the check boxes of success that I have versus what society has? And not that there's anything wrong with, or not that it shouldn't be revered when people can journey for a long time together. There's something really special about that. Very, very deep and very special, because you don't get to the layers of depth in a month or 6 months that you could over a long haul. And at the same time, going through a real authentic soul induction process of going through all those layers is challenging and confronting and difficult, which is maybe my curiosity why a lot of people don't do it. Why do we get complacent? And after 20 years of marriage, you see people that don't even know each other at all. And maybe the gap widens the longer they're together. And then there's other times you meet people and you're like, wow. And so I'm often keeping my eyes and ears open for examples of truth and vulnerability and authentic love where it's not so conditioned in our conditional sort of society, and while deprogramming and sort of unwrapping all these different layers so that one could be seen to the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting tension, and I'm always navigating this tension in my own mind. And certainly trying to tease it out in my own work. I think my work is, I often use the word dialectical, right? Holding the tension on both sides. It's neither nor. It's both and I'm always talking out both sides of my mouth. And I'll give a tip here. If you ever read my page, you will instantly notice, I might make a post one day that says one thing, and the next day I might make a post that says something just a little bit the opposite of it. And it's intentional, right? Because I think truth is both-sided. And it's only when we see it from both angles that we actually get a full vision of the truth. Truth is, masculine and feminine, right? Like we actually need both sides, so to speak, I think in this. So here, there's this beautiful thing that I think you're pulling out. For instance, love should feel loving. Like I think when a couple comes to me, or when I hear couples talk, one of the things that is instantly amusing to me is when, for instance, a new couple is locked in a very intense emotional experience where there's a lot of drama and conflict. I just had a dear friend come to me and he said, "Oh my God, wow, we're really in it. We're 3 weeks in and she is really uncovering all of my da-da-da-da-da-da." And I got to tell you, I wanted to say run. Because if it's really explosive now, it's probably not going to get less later. The illusion is that, if I put in the hard work today, it will dissipate over time. This has never been my experience.
Oh my God, you're speaking to me a little bit. See, I'm shifting around.
I know.
I'm comfortable in my seat here a little bit. Oh man, he's on to me.
This is, really, I'm speaking also to myself. We often fall into what is called the emotional intensity cycle. The emotional intensity cycle, we get suckered in by this deep desire for that emotional intensity. At first, we're drawn into it. The high is beautiful, and it feels connective, it feels nurturing, it feels loving. And it's overwhelmingly positive, enough so to keep us on the line. But positivity is actually a fairly expensive fuel. It's like, if you ever go to a gas station, it's like it has the 3 different kinds of fuels. It's the most expensive one. It's the purest and the most expensive. It burns pure, but it costs a lot. And so eventually you have to search for another lesser form and cheaper form of fuel. Enter problem solving. So you will substitute out that positivity that you feel in the beginning of the relationship to maintain that deep sense of emotional intensity. You will now go looking for something that can keep your intensity up. And what you find is problems to solve. So it's like, oh God, can you believe what they're saying about us, Marge? What are they saying about us? Oh, people don't like us very much. Or, hey, you know what? Maybe we should move across the country. Oh, really? Yeah, and now you've got problems to solve. It's you guys against the world, or it's a cross-country move. And now you've really got some issues to work through. That's fantastic. Or you've got a rupture and repair cycle that you're always now working on. I mean, it's like, what a great fuel source. I mean, bam, emotional intensity. Couples can live here for years, and actually highly successful couples. I mean, I think that this can be a hallmark for some. I don't take anything away. Some people can live here and become highly productive couples in an emotional intensity cycle for a long time. Rupture and repair. You can just keep on creating breaches in relationship, keep on creating crisis moments for each other and the world, as long as you want, so that you can keep on getting a dopamine hit. Mm-hmm. But eventually, that coal mine will get stripped. You will actually figure it out, that receptor will go blank. And so you'll have to actually go looking for another fuel source, and you'll find it. And that fuel source inevitably will be pathology. You'll start to go, we've run out of problems to solve. You're the problem, Bob. You're the problem. Or if you're kind of shame-based, you'll say, actually, I'm the problem. I'm a horrible human being. I probably don't even deserve to be in this relationship. And I think we've all kind of been there, in one way or another. And that's when it really becomes a toxic connection, right? There's a lot of blaming, a lot of shaming that goes on. And that's when the explosions hit. And that is when everything melts down. The relationship then ends. And here's the best part. That's when you go looking for a new fuel source and you find them. And it's positive. Oh my God, they're the best thing. Mom, they're just like me. They're just like me. And they're positive. And then begins the projection. Then begins the possibilities again. It's beautiful. Wow. The whole cycle repeats.
Yeah, it does. Well, and so why do we crave, and I don't mean to project on anybody. Let's say it this way. Why have I craved emotional intensity so much? There's the dopamine, and I know there's a lot of layers to it, but I do see this pattern in the world, and a lot of things are collective. We share these things, and as an individual, a lot of what you're sharing, like I've experienced this, and I like to think I've transformed and alchemized some of these pieces, and I can still feel where they're alive in my system. And then my curiosity is, I did kind of like it though. I like the drama, even though it was so painful, and I didn't like it at the same time. That, just like you said, we can talk on the tension of both. Mm-hmm. But the emotional intensity obviously serves a purpose, or it wouldn't be so common.
Yeah. I think the truth is that we have bubble wrapped our heart. That's why. Those of us who crave that, and by the way, I'm one of the us's, we crave it because there's a part of our heart that is bubble wrapped. It's numb. It's anesthetized. I looked at my partner actually not all that long ago, and I said, I need you to put your hand on my chest. I need you to almost leave marks on my skin. I need you to say, I love you very loudly in a way I can feel, because sometimes I'm so numb to it all. And I think that's the truth of it. I actually just think that is the truth of it. Sometimes I can't hear it. It's like sometimes, if I'm very honest, I can't really feel or hear the thing adequately. And I think that some of us crave that intensity because it was like when we were very young, maybe we were bombarded, our senses, our nervous system was bombarded with some kind of intensity that was overwhelming, probably is the truth, without getting all psychotherapeutic here. And so it left us stunted, I think, in a way, so that now we're constantly craving it. It's like we're constantly craving. We have to have something very, very large so that we can even hear it or feel it or notice it. The truth is we almost need a reset. That's actually the truth. We need to learn something that is very difficult to learn, that love is actually pretty easy on us, that love should feel gentle, that love should actually feel calm, that love should feel in some ways like a slow and steady unfolding, right? It should not feel like a constant bombardment of intensity. We like that because that's what became familiar at one point, right? But real love sustains our nervous system. It doesn't strain it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just, I hope everybody heard that. Letting that, maybe back up the recording if you're listening to this and hear that again, because I can feel that in my own system. And the image I got as you were speaking about some of these things, if we have a bubble wrapped heart, if we're using that analogy, I saw the paddles, the jolt to the heart that can wake us up or, crack that numbness open a little bit. And it can feel good, but I also have seen lots of addiction to stress in our society. Yeah. I've experienced that. I still experience that at times where we get the adrenaline hit, we get the neurotransmitters pumping through the body, and then we can move. And then we can work with that. We can move it. But I love the analogy of what you said with the fuel source. That helps me frame it so well in my own mind of, oh yeah, 100% that we're going to exhaust the fuel sources if we keep on going back to the same thing, and then we'll need it again and again and again, and we'll look for that. And, again, referencing Tony Robbins, he said, people will violate their own values to meet their needs.
Wow.
And that's, excuse me, that's what I get from that statement too, is we need a fuel source. If you run out of fuel, what happens? So we'll find a fuel source, even if it may not be suitable long term. And then with what you just shared there too, the gentle unfolding of love over time, I feel nourished by that statement, and that feels sustaining.
Wow.
In its unfolding versus the other that, kind of the extractive aspect of society that we see in lots of industries of extract, profit, done, extract, profit, done. And so I can see the parallels of the macro of what's happening right now planet wise. And, I'm very involved in learning about sustainable food and soil and all those things because of how much I see it impact people's health. That the things they're consuming, in some cases, the food at the supermarket actually takes more energy to break down and digest than what you get. And in this moment, I'm having this realization of relationships can be that way too if we're not moving through them in the best ways that we can. Then it is actually draining over time, and it doesn't need to be.
That is such a powerful vision, and I love the metaphoric use here and kind of extending that. I think the question that I like to ask people who are in connection, does this relationship actually bring out my best? Not in theory, but in reality. Like, do I actually like who I'm being? Not just who I'm with. Are the good moments actually good? I think that's probably like one of the best questions to ask. Like, are the good moments actually good, or are they just a relief from feeling badly?
Yeah. Oh yeah, man. Mm-hmm.
These are powerful questions. I mean, I think that any time that we're in a relationship, we have to ask ourselves these kind of questions. Like, do I actually even like the person I'm with? Do I actually like who I am in this connection? And when we start to ask these questions, we have to be willing to hear the real answers. Whether we're in a relationship for 2 weeks, or 2 months, or 2 years, or 20 years, those are important things to continually serve up. And then when we get the answers, then we begin to say, and what can I do about it? Right? Well, the first thing is we start to be honest to ourselves and then the people we're with. And I think that radical honesty is one of the most important things that we can approach a relationship with. And what honesty, what the often popularized term of authenticity really means is to be vulnerable, not just with a story that happened then and there, but with my actual emotions here and now today. Like, what's actually happening in me today? Oh, God, I've noticed I really don't like who I've become in this relationship. We're fighting a lot. Have you noticed that, Barb? We just can't stop arguing. And I don't like the version of myself that I'm becoming. Boy, I've noticed I've yelled at you 7 times this week. I've counted. I'm not really a yeller. I remember my parents yelling. That's not who I want to be. And when you begin to say these things out loud as truth, time has a way of moving faster. Time has a way of moving at the speed of honesty. And when you start to say the truth, things begin to change. Oh, you don't like it, Henry? Well, then you can just go and, or whatever. You begin to actually notice changes happen. People are stuck usually because they're not really being honest with themselves, with others.
Absolutely. Well, and in my own experience, what I've noticed for the longest time, I don't think I was even willing to consider what was deeper in me of what am I actually feeling? What do I want? What do I need here? I never used to ask those questions. I would ask it outwardly because somehow I think that felt safer to me. And then when I would start to feel the deeper knowing of how do I feel? And some of those questions is where am I at right now? And who am I becoming and how am I showing up? And does that even feel good to me? It seemed like I would often have a pretty big time delay on knowing what was in there and then actually actioning that in my life and in the world. And in some cases, I would sit on that for a long time. Yeah. And that's something I've been unpacking continuously. And I think there's a shorter refractory period now when I sense and feel something and I know it in my body that I could bring it to light more easily now. But I am often curious, like, why did I have such a gap there on what I knew to be true, but then how I was actually showing up in life of, staying too long in a relationship, or I know in a lot of cases, maybe people don't stay long enough, but I can feel like the similar mechanism at play deeper is not actually looking at what's there and then addressing it or bringing it into conversation. And I think that's one of the things that I've loved of a lot of what I've taken in of your content and your learning through lots of life experience is that there is that line of truth and authenticity that's brought forward like kind of in real time. And I can only imagine all the things that you've experienced to bring yourself to a place of that being the expression of that happening. And so for those of us that do feel quite a gap at times, what's your take on what's in the gap there?
Yeah, I think I think this has been really talk about like what are the questions your life wants to ask. This has been one of them for me, and I remember being it is one of the questions my life has wanted to ask. That is so funny. I'm now flooded with memories, even just sitting here with you. I remember stealing a peanut, a single unshelled peanut from the grocery store. I probably was 4.5 years old. I put it in my pocket in Chicago, Illinois, and I had asked my mother if I could get the peanuts, and she said no. And I put it in my pocket in spite of what she had said. And later I produced it, and she made me take it back. And I remember something in my throat, like a catch in my throat, welling up when I had to go to the cash register and tell the clerk or the manager that I had stolen something. And I remember what my mother told me, either before or after. She said, if you lie about it and do not tell the truth, you will eventually sear your conscience, and it won't even matter to you, and you won't even notice that you're lying anymore. And you won't even be able to tell the truth. You won't even be able to tell the difference between a lie and the truth eventually. I remember that very distinctly. And I kind of put that in my back pocket. Years later, I remember being probably a 13-year-old, and I had something I needed to confess to my dad. I don't exactly remember what it was, but I had that same kind of catch in the throat. And I remember a very physical sensation. It was like I went to go tell him, and I opened my mouth to say this thing to my father, and it was like there was like a pair of socks that was like stuffed in my mouth. I couldn't get it out. I went to say it, and it was like I couldn't say it. And I tried maybe 3 times, and I couldn't, and the car kept going. And finally, it was like I had to cough it out. Mm-hmm. I remember the physical sensation of almost barking it out to get it rolling about what had happened. Well, years later, I think I was in my mid to late 20s. I had ended a marriage. And I remember, the events that were surrounding it. And I remember going to tell her. And of course, I had been doing what so many of us do, which is plotting the ending. I say plotting because, a lot of us, we've been grieving for a long time before we tell the other person, right? We're not living in real time, and we're not being honest in real time. And so I went to speak to her and to tell her these things. And it was very, very difficult because you care about this person. You don't want to hurt this person. You do care for them. And you also care for yourself. You don't want to get hurt by their pain. And so, I went to tell her. And I remember I couldn't quite tell her. And so I kind of half stammered. The best I could do was say I want a separation. It wasn't the truth, though. That wasn't the truth. I knew what the truth was. The truth was I didn't want to be married. And I knew it. I dragged that out for 10 months. And we worked on that marriage in her eyes and mine. And during that time, I met someone else even. Now, she didn't know that. She thought we were working on it. Mm-hmm. Right? I was living a different truth because I didn't have the courage to be fully honest. Right? So then 10 months later, at the time of the allotted coming together, I say to her, a tremendous surprise. Well, I don't want to be married. And she's like, what? It's been good. And I said, well, I agree. It has been good, but I don't want to be married. She's like, this is a tremendous surprise. This is very shocking. Right? And then I had to come back a week later and say, well, the truth is I met someone. I got to tell you, 3 different truth-telling events were involved in that were each as painful, if not more painful than the one before, because I simply did not have the courage to say the reality. And even if I had gone upstream, it probably could have gone even further, because I was a singer-songwriter. And when I married her when I was 19 years old, 3 weeks after I married her, I wrote a song where I literally said those words, where I actually forecasted that I would fall out of love with her. And years later, when I would record an album, she came into the studio and burst into tears and said, "Oh my God, I get what that song was about all those years ago." So I guess what I'm trying to say is, we know the truth. And if we don't communicate it in real time, we do ourselves a deep, deep, deep disservice. Our bodies often know it first. Mm-hmm. So when we feel the resistance, when we hear that still small voice, which again usually is like a tingle in our spine, or like something in our jaw, in our neck, when we begin to kind of feel those sensory awarenesses, right, that combines with a thought or an image or an inner knowing, and usually we know what those things are if we haven't completely muted ourselves, mm-hmm. right? I would also say this. Most of us have muted ourselves. So it does take time to learn to trust ourselves again. As a little boy, and maybe you can relate to this, anyone who has kids might relate to this. How often have we been on road trips where we hear a parent say, or have heard a parent say, we have to go to the bathroom in the back. We're a little kid and we say, "I got to go to the bathroom." And the parent says, "No, you don't." Okay, well, that's the first invalidation of my body. The second is, I really have to go to the bathroom. Can you hold it? Can you ignore what's going on? Now, of course, we're not thinking we're doing the best we can. And I've been a parent 4 times over. I get it. But these are the micro invalidations that lead us to ignore the sensory awareness of what's happening in our body. So that by the time we're in our late 20s or our 30s or 40s, we don't even think, how do I know what my body is trying to tell me, what I want, what I don't want? Instead, we're numb. We're numb to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've fully answered your question, but I say start with your body and then relentlessly trust your knowing. Allow yourself to make some mistakes. It will take some mistakes along the way. It actually will. You probably will fuck up a few times. I think it's okay. Some plates will fall to the ground. Right? Yeah.
Well, and hence the layers of bubble wrap that we walk around with in our lives, of whether that's micro truths or macro truths being suppressed and wrapped up and then stuffed deeper and deeper. To me, these are the things that create illness in the body. And I agree 100%. The body always knows. The body, in my view, cannot lie. It is not, it's not capable of lying. Our minds are. But the body, no, it does hold the truth. And I've definitely experienced that firsthand. And these are the things that I'm often trying to tease out when I'm working with somebody. And of course, I get to turn these lenses on me regularly as, I do need to face that thing that's in there that my body's communicating, and I'm scared about that, or I don't know. And often in my case, it's the fear of the unknown, even though I feel like I'm more adept with the unknown than I used to be. But I'd be lying if I said I'm completely confident stepping into the unknown again and again. And maybe the notion from Disney films or all these other things of no, you just rescue the princess, you do this, it's all good. And you face the dungeons and you face the demons or whatever it is, and that's all. It's over, but it's not over. Mm-mm. And beautifully, I feel this way now more so as I'm so grateful there's endless depth to us in this life, and endless depth to the relational experiences we could have, and also the depth of things that may bring up. And I feel like I understand why people don't necessarily want to look there. And the places we most need to look, again and again seem to find us, even if we try and avoid it. And so, gosh, there's just so much humanity in everything we're talking about. I don't think there's a person that's going to be listening to this where it doesn't pull on like some element here, because the other thing I've noticed in the clinic, and I'm sure with the amount of visits you've had with clients or patients, that they often feel alone in what they feel.
Yeah.
And I've said this to many patients. If you were in the waiting room with all the other patients I saw this past month, and you all shared what you were going through, you'd find that you are most certainly not alone, that half the people I talked to in the last few weeks have almost said exactly what you've said. And that's actually given my heart plenty of peace in difficulty and things, that I'm not the only one that feels these things. I'm not the only one that feels my heart blocked at times, or a lot, and had addictions to drama or intense emotions, and that could be somehow, cast by the wayside completely. But over time, the deeper sustaining love of self, and, I can feel my commitment coming through here of, it is time for some mirror work for me. And I don't know what that is. And I can even feel a little resistance to doing that, because I don't know what I'm going to see in those eyes. But I think I'm curious enough now, with a sprinkle of courage, to, it's time to find out, if not now, then when is a good time to bring that forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, as we've been talking about this so much, it occurs to me, I think that people need to begin to know they can trust themselves. Like that deep trust, that inner voice. You're good. Like, you are actually good. How much have we been told that we are bad and broken? Anthropologists tell us that civilization is built on a few central tenets. Militarism is one of them. Patriarchy is another. Agricultural pursuits is another. But another one that often is not talked about is called therapeuticism. Now, bizarrely, they say this one goes all the way back to the roots of civilization 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. Curious, we wouldn't think of therapy being 6,000 to 8,000 years old. Well, it's therapeuticism, not therapy, not counseling per se. But it's the idea that you are bad or broken and needing to be fixed. And that civilization itself has a component that it is built upon that concept. That part of what enabled the gang of thugs that hoodwinked our ancestors into oppressing entire people groups, into building the hive mind of cities, is this idea that you are bad and broken and need religion and the state, right, to fix you. That you need someone who's been to the ivory tower. And I think that we've been taught by parents that we need to grow up and not be ourselves. We're educated by teachers to think differently than we already do. We're kind of like inducted by the workforce, to do something we've never been paid to do, or governed by the state to be compliant. Certainly, many of us have been taught by religion that we need to be rescued by some kind of deity or thought pattern that is foreign to us. We're relentlessly marketed to in ways that tell us that we're not okay, that we're not good enough, and we have to have this thing or this product to be happy. If you're anything like me, my family, the people I know best, we're taught to gain weight, lose weight, trim this, add to that, inflate that, rearrange this, conceal, cover up what we're born with. I think we're prescribed and pushed elixirs right and left. We are told that we are the disease. And everything conspires, I think, to teach us that we are bad and guilty and we should be ashamed. And I think the verdict unanimously is in for the entire run of civilization that you and I aren't okay. And that you and I, given the chance to sit in a room together and form a friendship, it can't work. Given the chance to form a relationship with others, it will be problematic, that your desires aren't okay. And I think this is a really devilish trick. We're constantly in need. Mm-hmm. And I think what I want to say is you can trust yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your desires aren't dangerous. They are dangerous in a world where we have been taught to suppress them and repress them, because any time that you're atrophied long enough, when you start to use them, you'll be wobbly. That muscle system will be pretty wobbly at first.
Absolutely.
So if we're going to learn to use these innate selves of ours again, if we're going to learn to add mass to our sense of self and our desires again, it's going to be a little awkward at first. And I think that's okay.
Absolutely. It's okay. And even what I said earlier about the perfectionist elements of my own patternings, I can now see why that would prevent me from having a conversation or taking that leap or making some of those decisions, because I didn't feel like I would be adept at it.
Yeah.
And beautifully in life, there's lots of things that I feel really good at, or I'm great at, and I can be great at a lot of different things. And so anything that I feel inadequate with, or that I won't be great at it, I can see that, I've avoided that, because I might be like that baby deer, trying to stand up for the first time. And yeah, there's an amount of humility that it takes to be able to do that. So I love this aspect of, love and courage. And, I'm a fan of the gene keys, and we've talked about that a little bit, that there's a gene key 21, and valor is the city. Valor is the highest frequency of that particular key. And the author, Richard Rudd, says, for a start anyway, is valor is courage plus love. And I can feel that dropping into my system, that if we can marry those two things of courage plus love, then maybe we will have those conversations in our awkwardness, in the clunkiness, in the lack of smooth conversing, but still better than not. And that is a service to the whole. And gosh, there's a lot of layers in that. I love everything that you shared. Yeah.
My father was a Christian minister, and I'm not terribly thrilled about institutional religion in general, if you might have caught from some of my comments. And but that having said, I am a student of religions, and I'm terribly grateful for having been introduced to so many of the stories, certainly in my childhood. And then a great number of religions since then. But I think of a particular story that I was told as a child related to the West's own homegrown wisdom teacher, Jesus, And I think the story goes, his disciples, his students who were fishermen, were fishing out all night, and they came up just, short of a catch. And I think that as the story goes, they were pretty discouraged, as I've done before in a fishing trip. I myself have never really had too much success. My kiddo, who's 11, he just caught 6 fish the other day after a string of bad fishing experiences for the summer, and he was just thrilled. So, good for him. I myself have never had a good run like that, and so I can relate to these poor fishermen. They're out there, and Jesus isn't with them, and he must have felt like a bit of a good luck charm. And as it turns out, they are there in the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus appears on the other end of the shoreline, and he says, "Cast your nets on the other side of the boat, you idiots," And it's like, well, had they not thought of that before? I have no clue. They do. And of course they catch this massive, haul of fish, and suddenly the empty boat is filled and they're all excited. And in that moment, one of the disciples sees Jesus, his eyes lock on him. And he does this interesting thing. He dives out into the water and he swims to the shore to embrace Jesus. And I've always loved this particular story for so many reasons, because I can put myself there. Like mundane living, you're going through the motions. It's repetitive. It's kind of hopeless. You're empty. You're coming up dry. And then there is this very familiar figure that kind of appears to you, a distant figure, and they invite you to do something different. And I think sometimes love occurs to us that way. Like, hey, try something different. Give it a different try, but it feels calming to you. It doesn't feel dysregulating in that moment. And then there's this awakening, you awaken and suddenly, boom, the fog clears, everything opens, and then there's the harvest, right? It's like a miracle. But here is what always stood out to me about that particular moment, and I love this. That miracle isn't ever to me about the fish. It's this guy on the boat who isn't interested in the fish. He's not interested in the miracle. It's like he sees his friend on the shore and he dives in the water and he swims and he braves the murky water of the morning and he gets to the shoreline and he falls there because I think he could have drowned, but he didn't. And I think love held him. And I think for most of us, that's how it is. After so many years of drowning, we're done with it. We're just ready to be loved. We're ready to be loved. And I think that loving requires courage like that. Loving requires risk. Loving requires us to dive in the waters. We could hang out with what seems miraculous, seems like a catch, seems like a haul, but no one feels strong. No one feels courageous. No one ever steps into love with a lot of confidence. We feel weak and wobbly. We feel insecure, and we dive in anyway. Love doesn't pencil out terribly well. It's not a very safe bet, ever. But we dive in anyway because everything waiting for us on the other side. Yeah, I think that's the miracle of love.
That is a miracle. Yeah. Cast your nets on the other side.
Yeah.
Rainier, this has been tremendous. I feel like we could carry on, and maybe we'll have to do a part 2 if you're up for that, because this is an area that I want to continue to learn more about, not just for myself, but for others. This is a conversation that needs to be had, and there's nobody exempt from this place of being a human. Nobody. And that's beautiful too. So we might as well name some things, bring it forward, share our hearts. And I really appreciate you for sharing your heart and, the candid nature of just being human together, and the failures and the successes. And even if we don't categorize anything, just the experience of being human. And that's part of what I'm here to do is, be human and experience that with others. And I appreciate you very much.
Oh man, this was really my pleasure. Thank you so very, very much.
All right. Well, thank you. And we're going to place some things in the show notes of how to get in touch with you and all the cool things that you're creating and impactful things that you're creating as well. And thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Thank you.